Hey everybody, morning. I just wanted to bring this video to you about the impacts of the Wellbeing Bill, which quite a lot of it is starting September. I think it's really important for us to understand how that impacts going forward and how that plays into some of the changes that are being proposed through the reforms of, you know, what currently is the Children's and Families Act, etc., whatever that's going to be. I wanted to look at the impact of what it says for our children right now. The increased regulation of home education, and the registers and the expectations that are going to be set on parents. And it really is frustrating because they concentrate on a small minority of children or families that might not always be able to provide what is classed as a suitable education. However, on the whole, home education children are usually doing 100% better than those children in schools, because the focus is often quite around the child. It's child-led. It's focused around the child's interests. So it's more one-to-one work. It's more intense. Quite often they're able to work more in depth on subjects. They work, and what gets me as well is when they sit and say that education's been in school. However, it's so much harder in a class of 30 to be able to target each child's needs, yeah? And when a child's home educated, gaps are filled very quickly because you can target that child because that's the only child that you are looking at. So for them to bring out all of these additional rules and regulations, etc., targeting home education families as they are is beyond, it just doesn't make sense. And I get, for some reason, that the government think that bums on seats within a classroom is how education works, and following a set, structured, strict curriculum is how education works. Now, I think curriculum is one of the biggest problems because it's very... They call it broad and balanced, but it's not broad and balanced, let's be honest. It's very linear, it's very targeted to specific points, but it's broad as in the aspect of very few people are going to get much out of it. How many people go away using trigonometry? How many people go away using Shakespeare? And I get, to a point, the understanding of some of these points, but I don't get the full-on, in-depth focus that's expected. When we look at what we are offering as a society, or what we have as a society, or even worldwide, what the economy looks like, we need to move past Shakespeare and trigonometry, and we need to start looking at the practical points of what's going to prepare our children for adulthood, what's going to prepare our children for work, what's going to actually give them a future. And right now I don't feel like the national curriculum does that, and I don't feel like the education system does that. And I feel like that's why home educated children on the whole do often come out of their education so much more accomplished and ready for adult life than those that come out the education system, because they've been exposed to what our society is like now. And I think the only way to solve our crisis within education would be to stop trying to shoehorn our children into the system that was set up for churning out factory workers who are compliance, and build a system that's going to start churning out critical thinkers and those that are ready to be an adult in today's world, because that's what we need to look at, being an adult in today's world. And that's what we do as, one of the very unique things I think we do when we're looking at working documents and EHCPs and stuff like that is we heavily focus on wording, because quite a lot of the medicalised wording that can be within those documents is quite derogatory to our children. And we also want to remember, whether the child's 5 or 15, eventually all of that paperwork is going to be read by that child, and we want them to see how we have supported them rather than blamed them. We want them to see how we have done the best for them throughout their education and provided them with an education that is suitable for them, and not continue to try and shoehorn them into an education that doesn't work. So we do put quite a heavily focus on changing the narrative and wording of EHCPs, etc. So then they are neuro-affirming and neuro-friendly. So yeah, that's one part of the wellbeing bill that we all need to be aware of. I think it's going to be even more of an issue as we go through the changes, and a lot more people find themselves in a situation where, if the reforms go through in education as they're being proposed currently, that the education system's not going to be fit for purpose for quite a significant number, especially SEND children. And a lot more parents are going to find themselves in a situation where they feel that home education is going to be the only solution, other than more damage being done to the child. So I think you need to be aware of that. Another point is around education. Not education attendance now. I always find it really, really bizarre the way that we're looked at attendance within school settings, yeah? I remember when the boys was in a mainstream school and they were being encouraged to go into school poorly. They were being encouraged to go into school with colds and viruses and flus and stuff like that, which then causes an epidemic in school because the people are spreading it, and then you got to think about the children that are immune compromised that are in school as well, which a simple cold to us might be life and death for them. But yeah, it is encouraged and even rewarded to go into school poorly. And then there's that narrative from schools where send them in, and if we feel that they're too poorly, we'll send them home. And it's again looking at parents like they're idiots and they don't know how to make a decision on whether their child's too poorly for school or not, and also whether putting your child into school would actually compromise other children as well. And I think it's ludicrous and doesn't take into account all they seem to care about is children being in school. Also, a child who's unwell is not in a position to learn. And when we talk about being in a position to learn, I talked about it before about the planets aligning, and it's really, really difficult for planets to align, and you've got to have all your planets aligned to be able to be in a position to educate. However, it only takes a slight small thing to knock one of those planets out, and then that child's not in a position to learn. So yeah, we can take our children into school, but it doesn't mean they're going to learn anything on that day, because their focus is going to be on how they feel and getting through the day and surviving the day. To you and me, it might not be much, but when you think about it as an adult, you make a decision on whether you're too ill to go to work or not, and that decision's accepted by others, and you are not necessarily forced into work when you're feeling poorly. So why do we do it to children? And this is one of the things that really grates on me, because there's lots of things that we're forced into doing with our children that us as adults make decisions not to do because it's not in the best interest of us. So why is it that the government and the education system and the local authorities want us to make decisions that are not right for our children when we wouldn't do the same thing to ourselves as adults? It makes no sense. It really grates me, it does that. And that's another thing as well. We need to stop is rewarding for attendance. You do not reward a child for going into school poorly. You do not reward a child for ignoring their body, burning themselves out, and making themselves mentally unwell. You do not reward a child for 100% attendance when that is damaging. Also, you do not penalise a child when they have time off because they have medical appointments, because they are sick, because they've got some sort of chronic illness, some sort of, anxiety that affects their ability to be able to attend school full time, all the time. It's about high time that we had no attendance awards, no attendance recognition, and that children and families were championed for making the right decision for the child at the time. And I think the fans need to be more looked at as well. I can understand if people are repeatedly taking their children out of school for holidays and days out, etc., constantly. I don't mean the odd one here and there, I mean constantly. That I get. But if we're going to start focusing on fining and cracking down on people because children are struggling to attend school because they're unable to, because they're anxiety, they're mentally unwell, or because they're burnt out, they're picking up a lot of viruses, illnesses, sicknesses, etc., then we've got a problem. And we've got to think to ourselves who the hell we are as a society if that's acceptable. Other parts of the Wellbeing Bill that we really need to be impacts. So the biggest thing as a positive that people are talking about, right, is free breakfast clubs. Now, I get that could help in the point of children, some children who come from families that are struggling, having that breakfast in the morning could help. Yeah, free breakfast clubs. My concern is about that, and one of the things that I found with one of my children in particular in a mainstream setting was when my child was struggling to attend school, the solution was to use their breakfast club as a way to get my child into school. So my child's struggling with the 9 till 3 school day as it is and massively overwhelmed, and their solution was instead of him going in with everybody else and I get the point of it's quieter and it's there's not as many children, but they wanted him to go into school an hour earlier at 8 o'clock for their breakfast club. In their eyes, that was a better solution because it meant he wasn't going in to school for at the same time as other children, so we're missing the crowds. But what they did fail to see was that was adding another hour to the day that he's already struggling with. Yes, it eliminates him going in with everybody else and it's a bit quieter, but that was the only positive. The negative was he was then around most children in that morning prior to starting school. He was around more adults that he actually didn't know and didn't have a relationship an hour prior to going into school, because none of those that run the breakfast club was actually the school teachers or teaching assistants. It was even longer in the day for him to manage to stay in school, and he was already physically exhausted by dinner time. It was even longer for him to try and manage with his difficulties around toileting within the school. It was more food issues for him to handle within the school as well, because he's got difficulties with food around sensory in his arthrid, to the point where when he first started school I always sent him a packed lunch in because I knew he wouldn't eat school meals, but the school insisted on trying to get him to pick something every single day from the food queue, and every single day he refused and he ate his dinner. And then halfway through the year the teacher said it's pointless to keep doing it because he's not going to eat any of our food. I can see that now, But because they'd ingrained it into him every single day, he has to go down the food line with the teacher and look at the food, he then wouldn't allow them to stop doing that and would create a fuss over that. So everything that they reckoned was a positive of him being forced to start that breakfast club was actually not a positive, and they were just adding more stress to the day. And it concerns me that the new proposed breakfast clubs are going to do that. Are going to add more stress to the day of our children, and it's going to be used as another way to try and push children that are struggling with school attendance because of the environment into school. So that's another point. I also think as well, when they talk about the increased safeguarding, and don't get me wrong, I have nothing against increased safeguarding for our children. It's really, really important that our children are safeguarded. But being in a situation where these routes are used against families like mine, it concerns me that there's going to be an increase in that. That there's going to be an increase because of the lack of understanding of children's needs. And that is one of the biggest problems, is when the professionals that are apparently professionals around you are not full versed with the area of needs that your child has. And the biggest problem is, you might get told, oh, we're a children's with disabilities social worker, this is our remit. But when we look at SEN, when we look at needs, it's so broad that it's impossible for one person to be fully educated, fully aware of all of it. And that's where it breaks down, because it's a very broad what do you call it, title that's given to people and marks them up as a professional of all SEN. Not a single person is a full professional of SEN. And the people that I work with, the really good professionals that I know and work with, will all agree with me on this, that they're not even fully apprised of all areas of SEN. And also, it's a thing to remember that things change, theories change, we develop as science changes, we understand more. And that's another thing to point out as well, is when people look at and say that, oh, there's more people being diagnosed nowadays, or there's more people, there's more ADHD people, etc. out there, or there's more people getting an autism diagnosis and all of that kind of stuff. Guess what? That's not true. We're just more aware. Like 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about boys and girls presentations of autism, yeah? Or being autistic, whatever way you want to word it. Nowadays, we understand there's no such thing as boys and girls presentation of being autistic. What we have nowadays is the understanding that there's different presentations, like internalised, externalised, and it doesn't come down to your gender, you know, and that is evolved. And because we've managed to evolve and develop and adapt that way of thinking, that then means that we have a greater understanding of what these presentations in different people, young people, young adults, etc., may look like. Therefore, we do recognise more people are autistic than we did 15 years ago. You know, we understand the internalised a lot more now than we did. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there anyway. There's probably more I could touch on the Wellbeing Bill, but those are the main points that I really wanted to talk about and the effects that it's going to have on our community going forward. I am aware that there is challenges being set against them, but obviously at this moment in time, nothing's been impacted and the Wellbeing Bill is going to come into force. And a lot of it is effective from September.